Hi, I'm Denise Jess, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired, and a proud member of the Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition. I'm so glad you're joining us today to learn more about voter rights for people with disabilities. As people with disabilities, we face many barriers to being able to cast our ballot privately and independently. It's just absolutely imperative that as voters with disabilities and family members of people with disabilities, that we understand both our rights and are prepared to know how to exercise them when we run into these barriers. So, over the course of the next little while, we're going to look at what some of those barriers are for voters with disabilities, and then we'll examine the rights of voters with disabilities, looking at guardianship, overall general rights of people with disabilities who are voters, looking at how do we ask for accessibility and accommodations, how do we file a complaint when necessary, and lastly, how do we make sure that we are well informed voters so that we are making important decisions about candidates and issues. We'll be sharing some slides with you through the course of this presentation. And I'll verbalize everything that's on the slide so that it is also accessible. Feel free to pause the video or go back as you might need so that you can take any important notes for your particular situation. Okay, let's go. I'm going to start with sharing a little bit with you about the Disability Vote Coalition. So the DVC is a nonpartisan effort to help voters with disabilities to be able to fully participate in the electoral process, ranging from obtaining a photo ID, through registering to vote, casting the ballot, and having access at the polling places. The coalition is coordinated by the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities and Disability Rights Wisconsin. It has a diverse membership made up of people with disabilities and agencies ranging from Access to Independence, the Wisconsin Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired, NAMI Wisconsin, People First Wisconsin, Mental Health America of Wisconsin, Wisconsin Association of the Deaf, Disability Rights Wisconsin, Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, the ARC of Wisconsin, Independence First, and many more. I hope that you'll visit the Disability Vote website at disabilityvote.org to learn more about our many resources. People with disabilities have historically been underrepresented at the polls because we face many barriers. A recent Rutgers University fact sheet on disability and voter access and turnout at the polls had some interesting findings focused on the elections from 2018 And it pointed out that in Wisconsin, there was a 10.4 percentage difference between the turnout of voters with disabilities and voters without disabilities. There are some really common historical barriers that often lead people to not vote or to experience difficulties in voting. Some of these include accessibility concerns, needing to obtain a photo ID in order to vote, failure of elections officials to provide accommodations, barriers in transportation, lack of training for poll workers on disability etiquette and disability accommodations, limited knowledge of the law on everybody's account, the voter and the poll worker alike. And the last historical barrier is stigma and discrimination towards people with disabilities. In addition to these historical barriers, the pandemic and the April and May 2020 elections have brought about additional and unique barriers for voters wishing to cast their ballots. People with disabilities are particularly vulnerable to COVID, so at higher risk for catching the disease if they attend the polls. There was a lot of confusion about the changing environment. Where were polls located? What were the rules? Because of law changes due to litigation. Many voters were disenfranchised. The Department of Motor Vehicles is charged with providing the necessary photo ID in order to vote, and these offices were available only by appointment, making it more challenging to get the proper identification. Absentee ballots arrived late or didn't arrive at all. And in Wisconsin, voters who cannot see or read or physically mark the ballot do not have an ADA compliant absentee option. Voters also reported having difficulties in registering to vote and obtaining their ballot when trying to upload their ID onto the State Elections Commission website. The witness requirement posed barriers, particularly for voters who lived alone, to sign the back of their envelope. No special voting deputies were assigned to care facilities, and family members were not allowed into these care facilities. So many residents did not have the necessary assistance in order to vote. Additionally, residents were told that if they left the facility to go vote in person, they would not be allowed back in. Transportation, which is always a barrier for voters with disabilities, became even more complicated with fewer options and greater risk of contamination from COVID. For those who voted in person, long lines became an issue. In many cases, curbside voting was not an option. and voters experienced barriers and lack of accommodations and access to the accessible voting equipment. And there was a lot of anxiety and fear of health risk. So now that we've painted the landscape of the barriers that face voters with disabilities, let's dig into the rights of voters with disabilities. And we'll start with guardianship. If you are a person who has a guardian, or you serve as a guardian for a person with disabilities, it is really important that you understand that in many cases, people retain the right to vote. The only time someone living under guardianship does not have the right to vote is when it has been ordered by the court. There is a court document referred to as a determination, an order on petition for guardianship due to incompetency, also known as GN 3170, that can be referenced to learn about the individual's voting status. While the document itself will not explicitly say if the individual can vote, there will be a checkbox on the document. If the box is checked, it means that the court has removed the right to vote for that individual. If someone is not clear about whether or not they have the right to vote, there are a couple of different alternatives for getting this information. First of all, the individual has the right to ask their guardian. If the guardian or the individual doesn't have a copy of that determination and order document, it can be obtained from the probate court office in the county of which the individual resides. It's important to note that there is a small fee, generally $2, to obtain that document. Alternatively, the individual or the guardian can contact the municipal clerk in their community. The municipal clerk receives from the state a list of individuals who have been adjudicated incapable of voting. A couple last points on guardianship. If someone has lost their right to vote, they are eligible to appeal to the court to have their voting rights reinstated. It's really important as a guardian to remember that you do not need to make the decision about whether or not someone can vote. That is a decision made by the courts. So now that we've taken a look at the rights and needs of voters with disabilities who are under guardianship, let's expand our understanding to the rights of all voters with disabilities. First, every voter, whether we have a disability or not, has the basic fundamental right to vote privately and independently. For people with disabilities, this means that we have the right to access the polling place and the pathway to that polling place. This is particularly important in a state like Wisconsin, where our winter comes early and lasts long and may have snow on our election days. Polling places are required to do that snow removal. All polling places need to have, by state law, accessible voting equipment, and any voter who wishes to may use that equipment. One does not need to be a voter with a disability to access that equipment. Frequently, we hear people say that that equipment is for people with disabilities only, and this is not accurate. So you have the right to use the accessible voting equipment at your request. As someone who uses that equipment myself, I will suggest that if you plan to use it, it may be beneficial to call your municipal clerk in advance of voting day and let them know that you intend to use it. Many voters have experienced getting to the polls and finding that while the equipment is there, it may not be properly set up or tested or functioning. You have the right to ask for assistance in completing your ballot. We can bring someone with us to help us do that. We can also ask a poll worker to help us do that. Poll workers are required to help someone complete their ballot when they are asked to do so. Again, really important to know that that is a requirement under the law. We've had poll workers who were unclear about this and felt apprehensive about helping a voter. People who can't assist you in completing your ballot are your employer and your union representative. As voters with disabilities, we have the right to reasonable accommodations at the polling place. Some of these reasonable accommodations might include a chair to sit down. They might include a signature guide to navigate the poll book, a magnifying glass, assistance with stating one's name and address, and written communication tools like pen and paper and easel to facilitate communication. If a voter can't access the polling place due to disability, Wisconsin law also mandates that there be curbside voting. Again, it may be wise to contact your clerk in advance of going to vote to let them know you wish to use this voter option. If you want to dig into voter rights some more, you're welcome to pop over to the disabilityvote.org website and view the video, Know Your Rights. Now, despite our rights being quite clear, it is still common for those of us with disabilities to run into an access problem or an issue with accommodations. We highly recommend that you deal with that issue in real time so that you have the ability to vote and cast your ballot as independently as possible, and so that you help pave the way for greater ease for other voters. In our one of our elections in February, I walked into my polling place and asked for a signature guide. And there wasn't one in the polling place kit. Immediately, my chief elections inspector for that polling place began crafting one out of cardboard and handed it to the folks doing the poll book. So my advocacy benefited me. It also benefited anyone else that day who required or desired a signature guard. So it's best to start with that chief elections inspector. Every polling place will have someone assigned to that role. Start there, be clear about what you need, and ask for them to follow through. If they're unable or unwilling to do that, contact your municipal clerk and ask for assistance. If you find that you're still not feeling satisfied with the outcome of contacting the chief elections inspector or your municipal clerk, you have the right to reach out to the Wisconsin Elections Commission. And you can do that in a couple of different ways. Through their website at elections.wi.gov/complaints. Or you can give them a call toll free at 1-866-VOTE WIS or 866-868-3947 and ask for assistance. Lastly, you can reach out to the Disability Rights Voter Hotline for information and assistance. That number is 844-DISVOTE, DISVOTE, or in digit form, that's 844-347-8683. We highly recommend that if you run into an accessibility issue, and particularly if it's not resolved, that you file a complaint. Filing a complaint is so very important for a couple of different reasons. One, as we talked about a couple minutes ago, you are performing a role as a really vital voter advocate. You're clearing the way for yourself to cast the ballot, and you're assisting any other voters at that polling place with disabilities in having more access to the ballot. Secondly, you're doing an awesome job of helping to educate elections officials so that they can do a better job of serving our needs as voters with disabilities. So again, complaints can be directed to the Wisconsin Elections Commission. And starting this past spring, they added a feature to their complaints webpage that's labeled Report an Accessibility Concern. It has a drop-down menu of some of the most common access concerns that you can simply select, or you can do a deeper dive and describe those concerns so that they're documented. If you would prefer to have that form sent to you in the mail and to fill it out by hand, you're welcome to do that as well. You can email elections at wi.gov and request that form, or call the Elections Commission at 866 VOTEWIS. The Disability Rights Wisconsin Voter Hotline, again, is another outstanding resource for being able to file that complaint. If you'd like help completing the complaint forms, please reach out to the DRW Voter Hotline. Again, that number is 844 DIS VOTE, or you can email info@disabilityvote.org. So as we start to wrap up our discussion, I just want to review helpful resources to reach out to if you have concerns as a voter. You can reach out to these resources the day of the election, before the election, as you're registering to vote, anywhere along the path. Please reach out for help so that you're able to cast your ballot. The DRW Voter Hotline is an invaluable resource. The Wisconsin Elections Commission, again, has dedicated resources to supporting voters with disabilities, and they are an excellent resource. Your municipal clerk also can be an outstanding resource. Wisconsin Election Protection is an organization that has volunteer attorneys ready to take your call or respond to your text on election day if you run into any particular concerns. You can call them at 866 687 8683, or you can text them our vote at the number 97779. Additionally, the Department of Motor Vehicles has a voter ID hotline for questions specifically about voter ID. They can be reached at 844 588 1069. Also, in the state of Wisconsin, you can apply for your voter ID online at the DMV website. And you're able to do that every 16 years, saving yourself the trip to the DMV to renew your ID. So all of our rights as voters with disabilities are so important. And as I said earlier, we need to know those and be ready to exercise them. The other side of the coin is that as voters, we need to be well informed so that we're making clear-headed mindful choices and decisions about the issues and the candidates that we're voting for. And there's a lot of good ways to be able to do this. One is that you can review a list of the elected officials and candidates who are running for office in your area. You can see your ballot for your particular area at myvote.wi.gov so that you're familiar with the ballot before you vote it. You can learn about the candidates. There are a lot of good ways to do that. You can participate in candidate forums. And in a time of COVID, many of these are available online. You can follow social media, and in particular, the social media of the candidates. You might want to visit the vote411.org website to learn about candidates and to see their responses to particular questions. The other thing you can do is help educate the candidates about our issues as people with disabilities. You can participate in town halls. Many will be virtual. You can email candidates or ask them questions on their social media. If you'd like some good examples of questions to ask, visit the Disability Vote Coalition's website and check out a couple of documents, key questions to ask congressional candidates, and key questions to ask state representatives for some examples. I want to thank you so very much for joining us today to explore the rights of voters with disabilities. Please join the Disability Vote Coalition's website and subscribe to the newsletter. That source is rich with many, many resources to support voters and their families. I want to encourage you to make a voting plan so that you can work through finding solutions to the barriers well in advance of voting, reduce your stress, and help ensure your right to vote, which is an important cornerstone of our democracy. Thanks so much. Go vote.